The word trash came out of Eleanor Whitfield's mouth so smoothly, so casually, that for a full second I thought I'd misheard her. Some of us built something with our lives, she said, raising her wine glass toward the rest of the table, her eyes fixed on me. And some of us just married into it. No offense, Callie. Trash finds a nice house to land in, that's all. 22 people went quiet at that Thanksgiving table. My husband's cousins stared at their plates. My own mother, visiting from Ohio for the first time in 3 years, set down her fork very slowly, the way she used to right before she said something she'd regret. I didn't say anything. I smiled, refilled the mashed potatoes, and asked if anyone wanted more turkey. What Eleanor didn't know, what almost nobody at that table knew, was that the house we were all sitting in, the house she had walked into like she owned it for 6 straight years, the house her son Bradley called the family home, had been purchased entirely with my money, was held entirely in my name, and had been for 18 months. I need to explain how we got here because none of it makes sense without the beginning. My name is Callie Bishop. I'm 34. Before I married Bradley Whitfield, I spent 11 years building a boutique architectural design firm from a card table in my studio apartment into a business with 14 employees and a client list that included 2 James Beard award-winning restaurants and a small hotel chain. I wasn't rich, but I was solvent, disciplined, and proud of every dollar I'd earned with my own hands. Bradley, when I met him, was warm and funny and worked in mid-level insurance sales. He made decent money. Not architect firm money. Not by a 6-bedroom colonial in the nicest part of town money. That house, the one Eleanor sat in every Thanksgiving calling me trash, I bought. Outright. In cash, from the sale of my previous company's building. Bradley's name was never on the deed, at his own suggestion, actually, for tax reasons his accountant recommended. Eleanor had simply never asked. And Bradley, for reasons I wouldn't fully understand until much later, had never corrected her assumption that her son had provided for us both. The first time Eleanor implied I'd married up, I laughed it off. It was our engagement dinner, and she'd made a toast about how Bradley finally found someone willing to work hard enough to keep up with him. I remember thinking, strange thing to say since Bradley had never once out-earned me, but grief and hope make you generous, and I loved her son, and I wanted so badly for this family to love me back. The comments never fully stopped after that. They just got sharper with time, in the way water erodes stone, slow enough that you don't notice the shape changing until one day you look and the stone is gone. You must be so relieved Bradley has stability, she said once at a birthday party, when I mentioned a slow quarter at my firm. I don't know how you manage being so independent, she said another time, with a tone that made independence sound like an illness. This house really suits Bradley, she told a neighbor once, gesturing at the living room I designed myself, down to the crown molding. Bradley would laugh these off too, when I brought them up privately. That's just Mom, he'd say. She means well. She had it rough after Dad left, you know that. I did know that. Eleanor had raised Bradley and his older sister, Nadine, largely alone after her husband walked out when Bradley was 9, working 2 jobs to keep their apartment in a decent school district. I respected that. I genuinely did. But respect for someone's hardship isn't supposed to be a blank check for how they treat you now. And somewhere in year 3 of our marriage, I stopped extending that check without noticing I'd stopped. The real shift happened in year 4, when Bradley lost his sales job during a company restructuring. He was out of work for 7 months. I covered our expenses without hesitation. The mortgage was already only in my name anyway, so nothing changed there. But I also covered his car payment, his half of groceries, his health insurance gap. I never once made him feel small about it because that's not the kind of partner I wanted to be, and because I loved him, and because that's what partnership means when it's real. Eleanor's narrative somehow during those 7 months became that Bradley was taking a break to figure out his next big move, and that I was lucky to have him managing the household while he searched. I heard her say this verbatim to her book club friends at a barbecue in our backyard. The backyard I had landscaped myself the summer before. I started to understand something painful during those months. Eleanor's comments weren't really about money. They were about control. As long as the story in her head was my son provides and this woman benefits, she remained the family matriarch whose approval mattered, whose son was still the man of the house. The truth, that I had built every brick of the life she sat inside, threatened a story she needed to be true. Bradley found a new job eventually, a decent one, though still nowhere close to my income. I never once threw that in his face. What hurt wasn't the gap in our incomes. It was watching Bradley let his mother's version of our marriage stand, uncorrected, dinner after dinner, year after year, because correcting her would have meant admitting out loud in front of his family how much he actually depended on me. By year 6, Eleanor's comments had graduated from passive implications to open insults, and Thanksgiving became her preferred stage. The year before trash, she told the table that she worried about Bradley marrying someone so focused on her career, as though ambition in a wife was a diagnosis. The year before that, she'd asked me in front of Bradley's entire extended family if I'd ever considered scaling back the business, now that you have a real home to take care of. I always let these comments pass with a smile, because I decided somewhere along the way that dignity mattered more to me than being right in the moment. But dignity has a limit, and Eleanor found it the night she called me trash in front of 22 people, including my own mother, who had flown in for the first time in years specifically because I'd told her how much better things had gotten. They hadn't gotten better. I'd simply gotten better at hiding it. That night, after everyone left, my mother sat with me at the kitchen island, the island I'd chosen the marble for myself in a showroom 18 months earlier, and asked me quietly, "Callie, does she know?" "Know what?" "That you own every square foot of this house. That you probably always have." I told her the truth. Eleanor had no idea. Bradley had never told her, and somewhere along the way I'd stopped correcting the record too, because correcting it always seemed to cause more tension than letting it go. But my mother, who had raised 3 kids on a nurse's salary and never once accepted anyone calling her trash for it, looked at me the way only a mother can and said, "Sweetheart, some silences protect people. This one is just protecting a lie. Those aren't the same thing." I didn't confront Eleanor that night. I didn't confront Bradley either, not yet, though I should have years earlier. Instead, I did something quieter and in hindsight far more effective. I asked Bradley one direct question the next morning over coffee calmly. "Why does your mother think you bought this house?" Bradley went quiet in a way that told me everything before he even answered. "I never said that," he said. "I just never corrected her when she assumed it. For 6 years. It was easier," he said. "You know how she gets about money, about men providing. I didn't want to deal with it." I understood in that moment that Bradley hadn't lied to protect me. He'd let a lie stand to protect himself from an uncomfortable conversation with his mother, a small, ongoing cowardice dressed up as keeping the peace, and I had unknowingly paid the emotional cost of that convenience for 6 years, one Thanksgiving insult at a time. I told Bradley plainly. The next family gathering, the truth was coming out, whether he said it or I did. I gave him the choice of which. He asked for time. I gave him until Christmas, 5 weeks away. Christmas that year was hosted at our house, same as always, with Eleanor arriving 3 days early the way she always did, rearranging my kitchen cabinets the way she always did, and telling my own housekeeper within my hearing exactly how Bradley likes things done. Bradley did not use those 5 weeks the way I'd hoped. I want to be honest that I didn't spend those 5 weeks plotting some elaborate reveal. I'm not a person who enjoys spectacle. What I did instead was simpler, and in some ways more devastating because it required no performance at all, only documentation and an invitation. I pulled the deed to the house, the closing documents from the original purchase, and the 6 years of mortgage-free property tax statements that had only ever come to me under my name at my business address because I'd set it up that way from the start. I made copies, not to weaponize them dramatically, simply to have them ready in case Eleanor, once told, decided to argue with the truth the way she'd always argued with everything else. I also called Nadine, Bradley's older sister, someone I'd always gotten along with better than I had with Eleanor. Nadine had quietly hinted over the years that she found her mother's comments about me a lot, and I trusted her enough to tell her the truth before Christmas, so she wouldn't be blindsided at the table the way everyone else would be. Nadine's reaction surprised me. "Callie," she said, "I've always assumed you and Bradley split things evenly. I had no idea Mom thought he was carrying you. She's going to lose her mind." "I'm not trying to embarrass her," I said, and I meant it. "I just can't sit through one more dinner being called trash in my own house." Nadine agreed to be there, quietly, as a witness rather than a participant. I didn't ask her to defend me. I only asked her not to soften what was about to become undeniable. Christmas Day arrived with 18 family members around the same table where trash had landed 6 weeks earlier. Eleanor arrived in fine form, complimenting the tree, which she'd insisted on redecorating the day before, replacing my ornaments with hers for a more classic look, and telling Bradley's uncle within my hearing how impressive it was, what Bradley had built for this family. I let dinner proceed normally. I wasn't going to ruin anyone's meal. But when dessert came out, and Eleanor raised her glass again for her traditional Christmas toast, this year to hard work and providing for family, I finally spoke. "Before you finish that toast, Eleanor," I said, calm, not raising my voice, "I think there's something you should know since you've said it a few times now, and I don't think it's fair to Bradley to keep letting the wrong story stand." The table went quiet the way it had at Thanksgiving, except this time, I wasn't smiling and refilling mashed potatoes. "This house," I said, "the one we're sitting in right now, was purchased in cash 18 months before Bradley and I got married, using money I earned from selling my design firm's original building. It's in my name. It's always been in my name. Bradley's never made a mortgage payment on it because there's never been a mortgage. I don't say this to embarrass him. I say it because I'm tired of hearing that I'm trash who got lucky landing in someone else's house, when the truth is the opposite of that. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. The silence around that table did more work than shouting ever could have. Eleanor's face did something I will never forget, a kind of physical collapse of certainty, the exact opposite of the composed superiority I'd watched her wear at every holiday for 6 years. "That's not," she started, then looked at Bradley. "Bradley, tell her that's not right." Bradley, to his credit, finally did the one thing I'd been asking him to do for 6 years. He looked at his mother and said, quietly but clearly, "It's right, Mom. Callie bought the house before we got married. I should have told you a long time ago. I'm sorry I let you believe something else." Eleanor's next reaction was the one that told me everything I needed to know about the past 6 years. She didn't apologize. She got defensive. "Well, why didn't anyone tell me?" she said, as if the omission were somehow everyone else's failure but her own repeated insults were beside the point. "I've been embarrassing myself at the country club, telling people my son bought that beautiful house." Nadine, quiet until then, finally spoke. "Mom, you've been embarrassing Callie for 6 years, calling her trash and implying she married up. Maybe sit with that part first." The table stayed silent for what felt like a full minute. My mother, sitting beside me, reached over and took my hand under the table, the same way she used to when I was small and scared of something in the dark. Eleanor didn't apologize that day. Some people can't in the moment when their whole understanding of themselves gets rearranged in front of a room. But something shifted at that table regardless. A story that had run unchallenged for 6 years finally met its ending, whether Eleanor was ready for it or not. The weeks after Christmas were quiet in a way that felt at first like punishment and later like relief. Eleanor didn't call for nearly a month, the longest silence between us in the entire marriage. Bradley, meanwhile, seemed to wake up from something. He apologized to me properly, not just at the table for show, but at home several times, admitting that letting his mother's version of events stand had been the easiest kind of cowardice, one that cost me something every single Thanksgiving while costing him nothing but an uncomfortable conversation he kept avoiding. "Why didn't you ever just tell me how much it bothered you?" he asked one night. "I did," I said. "You just always decided keeping the peace with her mattered more than believing me." He didn't have a good answer for that because there wasn't one. What he did instead, over the following months, was better than an answer. He started correcting the record himself unprompted at smaller family gatherings, mentioning casually that the house was mine, that I'd built my firm from nothing, that he was proud of me in a way I hadn't heard him say out loud in years, maybe ever, in front of his family. Eleanor eventually called. Not to apologize outright, that never fully came and I stopped needing it to. But she asked carefully if she could come by to talk. I said yes because I'm not interested in permanent war. Only in a family that finally operates on the truth instead of a comfortable fiction. Eleanor sat at my kitchen island, the marble I'd chosen myself, and said the closest thing to an apology I ever got from her. "I think," she said slowly, "I built a story where Bradley was the strong one, because that's the story I needed after his father left. I think I needed him to be the provider, so I never really looked at the truth in front of me. It wasn't a full apology. It didn't undo 6 years of trash and lucky and independent said like a diagnosis. But it was honest in a way Eleanor rarely allowed herself to be, and I decided honesty, even 6 years late, deserved to be met halfway. I don't need you to grovel, I told her. I need you to stop rewriting who I am to make yourself comfortable. That's all I ever needed. Things didn't become perfect after that conversation. Eleanor is still Eleanor. She still occasionally slips into old habits, still occasionally needs a gentle correction at a family dinner. But the difference now is that Bradley corrects her before I have to, every time without hesitation, which is the entire thing I'd been asking for since year one. My mother flew back to Ohio a few days after Christmas, and before she left, she told me something I've held on to since. You know, she said, you could have told Eleanor the truth years ago. Why didn't you? I think part of me didn't want to need to prove anything, I said. I wanted to just be loved without a receipt attached. That's a nice idea, my mother said. But some people only respect what they can measure. It's not fair. But it's true for some people, and Eleanor's one of them. There's no shame in finally showing her the receipt, if that's the only language she was ever going to understand. I've thought about that a lot since. I don't think I did anything wrong by staying quiet as long as I did. I think I was trying genuinely to build a family on love instead of leverage. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with finally speaking the truth plainly. Once patience stops being a virtue and starts being a shield for someone else's disrespect. It's been 1.5 years since that Christmas dinner. The house is still mine. Still full of the crown molding and marble and landscaping I built with my own hands over a decade of work most people never saw. Eleanor still visits, though less like she owns the place and more like a guest who's finally aware she's won. Bradley and I are better than we've been in years, not because the money conversation magically fixed everything, but because he finally stopped letting a comfortable silence protect him at my expense. That's really what this was always about. Not the house, not the deed, not even Eleanor's insults specifically. It was about whether the man I married would rather keep the peace with his mother, or tell the truth on behalf of his wife. It took him 6 years and one very quiet, very calm Christmas toast to finally choose the second one. If there's one thing I'd want anyone hearing this to take with them, it's this. You don't have to raise your voice to be believed, and you don't have to prove your worth to people determined not to see it. But when someone builds an entire story about you that isn't true, and lets it stand year after year at your own table, there comes a point where the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and honestly for them too, is simply hand them the truth quietly, and let them finally sit with it. That's what I did. And I haven't been called trash at my own Christmas table since.